They called her worthless, a stain on the bloodline, the Omega who should have died at birth. But on the night of the blood moon, when the cursed Alpha King transformed into a monster that could tear kingdoms apart, Lyran Vale did something no one in the wolf realm had ever dared. She walked straight into the beast's jaws and refused to run. What happened next would shatter 1,000 years of tradition and ignite a war that would decide whether strength or compassion ruled the throne. This is her story. Stay until the end to see how the girl everyone dismissed became the queen who changed everything. And if you're watching from your city right now, drop it in the comments below and hit that like button. Let's see where our pack is watching from tonight. The Grand Hall of Ashenwood reeked of ambition. Not literally, though Lyran Vale had scrubbed enough floors to know what desperation smelled like, but in the way power always stank when it gathered in one place. The air was thick with perfume, roasted meat, and the particular kind of cruelty that came wrapped in silk and smiles. Chandeliers dripped crystal light over the assembled wolves of the realm, their eyes gleaming with hunger that had nothing to do with the feast laid before them. Tonight was the Claiming Moon Festival, the night when unmated wolves from every pack in the kingdom gathered to find their fated mates, to form alliances, to climb another rung on the ladder of wolf society. For most, it was opportunity. For Lyran, it was survival. She pressed herself against the stone wall near the servants' entrance, a silver tray clutched in her trembling hands. The tray was empty now. She'd already delivered the champagne to her stepsister's table, but she held it anyway because it gave her something to do with her hands, some excuse for existing in a space where she clearly didn't belong. Move, Omega. The command came from a beta server, a young man whose name she didn't know and whose face held the particular contempt reserved for those who thought themselves better than trash, even if only by a hair. Lyran stepped aside quickly, her head down, her auburn hair falling forward to hide her face. It was a gesture she'd perfected over 20 years of practice. Being invisible was an art form when you were an Omega in the Bloodstone Pack, the lowest rank in a society that measured worth in strength and dominance. And Lyran wasn't just any Omega. She was a Vale, daughter of Marcus Vale, the Pack's former beta, a man who'd once commanded respect until the day he died defending the Pack borders and left behind a weak, powerless daughter who couldn't even shift into her wolf form. The shame of it had been too much for her father's legacy, too much for her stepmother, Helena, who'd remarried within 6 months to secure her position. Too much for her stepsister, Seraphina, who'd inherited their father's strength and wore it like a crown. "There you are, you little rat!" Lyran's stomach dropped at the sound of that voice. She looked up to see Seraphina cutting through the crowd, her golden hair swept up in an elaborate style that probably cost more than Lyran's yearly clothing allowance, which was 0. Seraphina was beautiful in the way predators were beautiful, all sharp edges and calculated grace. She wore a gown of deep emerald that complemented her amber eyes, the color of dominance, of power. Behind her trailed 2 of her friends, other pack daughters who'd learned early that cruelty was currency in their world. "Did you really think you could hide in the shadows all night?" Seraphina's smile was poisonous honey. "Mother wants you at our table. Apparently it looks bad if her charity case isn't visible." I don't care what you were doing." Seraphina grabbed the tray from Lyran's hands and thrust it at one of her friends. "Come, now." Lyran followed because she had no choice. The alternative was being dragged, and that would cause a scene, and scenes meant attention, and attention meant questions about why Marcus Vale's daughter was such a disappointment. Helena had made it clear years ago what would happen if Lyran embarrassed the family publicly. The last time had earned her 3 days locked in the cellar with nothing but water and stale bread. They wove through the crowd, Seraphina's entourage parting wolves like a ship cutting through water. Lyran kept her eyes down, trying not to notice the way conversations paused as they passed, the way eyes tracked her with a mixture of pity and disdain. "Is that the Vale Omega? Can't even shift, I heard. Such a waste of her father's bloodline." The whispers followed her like ghosts. They always did. The Vale table was positioned in the second tier of the hall, high enough to maintain their status as former beta blood, low enough to remember their fall from grace. Helena sat at the head, her severe features arranged in a smile that didn't reach her eyes as she conversed with Lady Thorne, another pack matriarch. "Ah, Lyran." Helena's voice was crystal and ice. "How kind of you to join your family." "It wasn't kindness. It never was. But Lyran knew her lines in this play. Forgive me, mother. The word tasted like ash, but she'd learned to swallow worse. I was ensuring the servers had everything they needed. How industrious. Helena's smile sharpened. Do sit down. Lady Thorne was just commenting on how fortunate Seraphina is to have such a devoted sister. The word sister dripped with irony thick enough to choke on. Lady Thorne's expression suggested she understood the game perfectly. Helena displaying her charity while simultaneously ensuring everyone knew exactly what Lyran was. A burden, an embarrassment, a reminder that even good bloodlines could produce defects. Lyran took her seat at the far end of the table, the position reserved for those who were present but not important. A servant immediately appeared to fill her glass with water. Not wine, never wine, because Omegas at formal functions were expected to remain sober and useful, and then vanished. I heard they increased security tonight, Lady Thorne was saying, her voice pitched low with excitement. 3 times the usual guard. Well, of course, Helena leaned in conspiratorially. The king is coming. The effect was immediate. Conversation stuttered at nearby tables. Eyes went wide. Even Seraphina's perpetual expression of smug satisfaction faltered into something that looked almost like fear. King Draven? Lady Thorne clutched her chest. Here? But he never attends the Claiming Moon festivals, not since the curse, Helena finished smoothly. Yes, well, apparently he's reconsidered, or perhaps he's grown desperate. She took a delicate sip of wine. After all, it's been 10 years since Queen Alara died, and the curse only grows worse. They say he hasn't found a single wolf who can tolerate his presence for more than a few minutes. I heard he killed the last one who tried, one of Seraphina's friends whispered. Just from proximity. The pain of the curse drove her mad and she threw herself from the tower. That's just gossip, Seraphina said, but her voice wavered. It wasn't just gossip. Lyran had heard the stories, everyone had. King Draven Mordrake, the cursed alpha who descended to the throne after his brother's assassination and his mate's death in the same bloody week. The wolf who radiated such raw, uncontrolled power that it caused physical pain to those near him. A king who ruled through fear because the curse that consumed him left no room for anything else. The Mordrake curse was legendary, a punishment carved into the royal bloodline 3 centuries ago by a witch queen whose daughter had been murdered by a Mordrake king. The curse ensured that every Mordrake heir would be powerful beyond measure, but that power would come with a price. Constant, excruciating pain that only intensified with age. Pain that could only be eased by the touch of a true mate. Draven had found his true mate once. Queen Alara had been beloved, a gentle Luna who'd tamed the beast in him, but she'd died giving birth to a stillborn child, and with her had gone the only relief Draven had ever known. Now he was a king trapped in agony, ruling a kingdom that feared him too much to love him and respected him too much to overthrow him. He's probably looking for a replacement, Helena said dismissively. A political match. Someone strong enough to stand beside him, even if they can't ease the curse. That would be Seraphina, Lady Thorne said with a knowing smile. I can't imagine a better candidate. Strong bloodline, excellent breeding, and such grace. Seraphina's cheeks flushed with pleasure, but Lyran saw the fear still lurking in her eyes. Being chosen by the king was an honor. Being unable to tolerate his presence was a death sentence, politically, if not literally. Lyran said nothing. She never did at family gatherings. Her role was to be present, to serve as a contrast that made Seraphina shine brighter and then to disappear. She was good at disappearing. The hall's energy shifted suddenly, like a storm front rolling in. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the musicians in the corner faltered, their melody turning discordant before cutting off entirely. He was here. Lyran felt it before she saw him, a pressure in the air, a weight that made her lungs work harder for each breath. It wasn't physical, not exactly, but it was real, tangible, like the moment before lightning struck when the world held its breath and waited for impact. The massive doors at the hall's far end opened, and King Draven Mordrake walked in. He was taller than she'd imagined, broad-shouldered and moving with a predator's fluid grace despite the obvious tension in his frame. His hair was black as midnight, worn longer than was fashionable, and his eyes, Even from this distance, Lyran could see them, were the silver blue of a winter storm. He wore black, unrelieved except for the silver wolf insignia over his heart, and he looked like what he was, dangerous. But it was the pain that stole Lyran's breath. She'd expected power. She'd expected danger. She hadn't expected to feel his agony like a physical blow, radiating from him in waves that made her chest constrict in sympathetic response. It poured off him like heat, invisible but overwhelming, and she watched as every wolf in his immediate vicinity took an unconscious step back. They felt it too. The curse. The price of his power. "Goddess above," Helena breathed. "He looks worse than last time." He did. Even Lyran, who'd never seen him before, could tell something was wrong. The king's jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. His hands, clasped behind his back, were white-knuckled. Each step seemed to cost him, though his pace never faltered. He was walking through glass, Lyran realized, through fire, and doing it with his head high because to show weakness was to invite challenge, and in their world, a challenged king was a dead king. The crowd parted for him like water. Lord Theron, the alpha of the Ironwood Pack and the king's closest advisor, appeared at his side, murmuring something too low to hear. Draven's response was a slight nod, but Lyran saw the way his pupils had blown wide, the way sweat beaded at his temples despite the hall's cool temperature. He was barely holding on. "He's coming this way," Seraphina hissed. She was right. The king's path would take him directly past their table, and Helena was already rising, preparing to curtsy, to present her daughter, to seize an opportunity that most could only dream of. "Seraphina, stand up," Helena commanded. "Lyran, stay seated and don't move." Of course, Lyran was furniture that might embarrass them if it drew attention. She kept her head down as the king approached, focusing on her hands folded in her lap, on breathing steadily, on being invisible. But that pressure grew stronger with each step he took, that sense of pain so intense it made her own body ache in response. How did he stand it? How did anyone survive carrying that much suffering every moment of every day? "Your Majesty," Helena's voice was silk and honey. "What an unexpected honor. May I present my daughter, Seraphina Vale?" Lyran heard Seraphina's sharp intake of breath as she curtsied. Through her lowered lashes, she could see the king had stopped, his attention on her stepsister. Seraphina was beautiful, composed, everything a potential queen should be. But even from her position at the end of the table, Lyran could see the tremor in Seraphina's hands, could hear the way her breath came too fast. The curse was affecting her, the proximity to his pain overwhelming her carefully maintained composure. "Miss Vale." The king's voice was rough, like gravel scraped over stone. "A pleasure." It clearly wasn't, for either of them. Seraphina's smile was strained. "The honor is mine, Your Majesty. I've long hoped to—" She didn't finish the sentence. Her eyes rolled back and she crumpled. The hall erupted into chaos. Helena shrieked. Lady Thorne gasped. Two servants rushed forward to catch Seraphina before she hit the floor, and suddenly there were voices everywhere, wolves pressing in, concern and scandal mixing in equal measure. Lyran remained seated, invisible in the chaos, watching as her stepsister was carried away by the pack healer who'd rushed to the scene. Seraphina hadn't been hurt, just overwhelmed. The curse had been too much for her. "Your Majesty, my deepest apologies." Helena was practically prostrating herself. "Enough!" The king's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "It's not her fault. It's mine." The raw self-loathing in those words made something twist in Lyran's chest. He blamed himself for being cursed, for being in pain, for the crime of existing in a way that hurt others. She knew that feeling too well. The king moved to leave, Lord Theron already clearing a path, and Lyran felt a strange relief that the pressure would ease, that she could breathe normally again, that her water glass tipped. It was such a small thing, a stupid, clumsy accident. Her elbow had knocked it as she'd shifted in her seat, and suddenly ice water was spilling across the table, onto her lap, onto the floor, and she was half standing, half crouching, trying desperately to catch the glass before it shattered. Her foot caught in her chair. She fell forward. The world slowed to a crawl. She saw the floor rising to meet her, saw the king's boots directly in her path, realized with a horror that froze her blood that she was falling directly at his feet, that she was about to collide with him, that everyone was watching. She hit the ground hard, her palms slapping marble, her knees screaming protest. The impact knocked the air from her lungs, and for a moment she could only kneel there, stunned and mortified, waiting for the punishment that would surely come. The hall had gone absolutely silent. Slowly, painfully, Lyran raised her head. King Draven stood directly above her, close enough that she could have touched his boots. Close enough that his pain hit her like a physical force, wave after wave of agony that should have been unbearable. But it wasn't. It hurt, yes. It was overwhelming, yes. But underneath the pain, she felt something else. Something that hummed in her bones, that resonated in her chest like a tuning fork struck by a master's hand. She felt his suffering, but she also felt him, the person beneath the curse, the king beneath the monster. And for the first time in 10 years, Draven Mordrake was staring at someone who hadn't flinched away. Their eyes met. His were wide with shock, the silver-blue irises blown out until only a thin ring of color remained. She watched emotions flicker across his face, too fast to name. Surprise, confusion, something that looked almost like hope before it was crushed beneath what could only be described as terror. You. The word came out strangled. You can feel... I'm sorry. Lyran's voice cracked. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to... What's your name? The question was a command. She couldn't have disobeyed if she'd wanted to. Lyran. Lyran Vale. Something flickered in his expression. Marcus Vale's daughter? She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Of course he would know. Everyone knew the story of Marcus Vale's heroic death and disappointing legacy. The king looked at her like he was seeing a ghost, or a miracle, or a trap. Your Majesty. Lord Theron appeared at his side, concern etched into every line of his weathered face. We should... Bring her, Draven said. The hall erupted again. Helena's shriek of outrage cut through the noise like a knife. Your Majesty, she's an Omega. She's nothing. You can't possibly... I am your king. Draven's voice dropped to a tone that could have frozen oceans. And I can do what I want. She's coming with me. 2 guards appeared at Lyran's sides, helping her to her feet with a gentleness that shocked her. Her legs shook. Her mind spun. This couldn't be happening. This was a nightmare, a fever dream, a... Move, one of the guards said quietly. Not unkindly. Lyran moved. The crowd parted for them, whispers exploding in their wake like fireworks. She caught glimpses of faces, Helena's fury, Lady Thorne's shock, dozens of pack wolves staring at her with expressions ranging from pity to horror to something that looked like disgust. The Omega. The cursed king had chosen the Omega. She didn't look back, couldn't look back, just kept walking, kept breathing, kept trying to understand what had just happened. The king had claimed her, and nothing would ever be the same again. The king's private chambers were nothing like Lyran had imagined. She'd expected opulence, gold and silk and the kind of luxury that proclaimed power in every carved surface. Instead, she found herself in a space that was almost stark. Large, yes, but furnished with brutal simplicity. A massive bed with dark linens, a desk piled with paperwork, walls lined with maps and correspondence. The only decorative element was a portrait above the fireplace, a beautiful blonde woman with kind eyes, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Queen Elara, the mate who died. Sit. Lyran jumped at the king's voice. He'd moved to stand before the fireplace, his back to her, his shoulders rigid. The 2 guards who'd escorted them had remained outside, closing the door with a finality that made her stomach drop. She was alone with the king, the cursed, dangerous, clearly unstable king who just claimed her in front of the entire court for reasons she couldn't begin to understand. There were 2 chairs near the fireplace. She chose the one farthest from him and sat, her hands gripping the armrest so tightly her knuckles went white. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of flames. Draven stared into the fire like it held answers, his jaw still clenched, his entire body vibrating with tension. Do you know why I brought you here? His voice was rough with exhaustion. No, Your Majesty. The truth. It wasn't a request. Lyran swallowed hard. Because I didn't faint when the others did. When the others did, he repeated, bitter laughter in his voice. Every wolf in that hall could barely stand to be near me. Your stepsister collapsed from 5 feet away. But you... He turned to face her, and the raw pain in his expression made her breath catch. You fell at my feet, closer than anyone's been in years. And you didn't run. You didn't scream. You just looked at me. I felt it, Lyron whispered. The curse. I felt your pain. Everyone feels the curse. His hands clenched into fists. That's what it does. It radiates out from me like poison, driving everyone away, making me untouchable. A king who can't be touched. How convenient. There was such bitterness in those words that Lyron felt an absurd urge to comfort him, to somehow ease that anguish. But what could she possibly say? She was nobody. Nothing. An Omega who couldn't even shift. I felt something else, she said quietly. His eyes snapped to hers. What? I felt you. Underneath the pain. I felt... She searched for words. It's like standing in a storm. The wind and rain hurt, but underneath you can feel the power of it, the purpose. The pain isn't all you are. Draven stared at her like she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten existed. Then he moved, crossing the space between them in 3 long strides, dropping to his knees in front of her chair with a violence that made her flinch. Don't, he said, his voice ragged. Don't give me hope. Hope is crueler than the curse ever was. I'm not trying to... Alara could ease the pain. His eyes were fever bright. She was my true mate, and her touch was like breathing after drowning. For 8 years, I had that. I had her. And then she died, and the curse came back stronger than before, and I learned that hope was the real torture, wanting something you can never have again. Lyron's heart cracked at the devastation in his voice. This wasn't just a king. This was a man who'd lost everything and was still somehow standing, still somehow ruling, held together by nothing but pure, stubborn will. I'm not her, Lyron said softly. I know that. Draven's laugh was harsh. Believe me, I know. But for just a moment, when you looked at me, I felt at ease. The pain. Just a fraction. Just enough to remember what it felt like to not be dying from the inside out. She understood then. The real reason he'd brought her here. Not because he thought she was special, not because he felt any attraction to her, but because she'd given him a moment of relief, and he was desperate enough to grasp at even that fragile thread. You want to see if it was real, she said. He nodded, not meeting her eyes. I need to know if I imagined it. If it was just proximity or shock or some trick my mind played because I wanted so badly for it to be real. And if it wasn't, if I can't help you, then you go back to your life. His voice was flat. I'll compensate your family for the disruption. You'll be fine. But she wouldn't be. They both knew it. Helena would make her life a living hell for the embarrassment of tonight. Serafina would find new and creative ways to punish her for daring to steal even a moment of the king's attention. She'd be back to being invisible, except now everyone would know exactly how pathetic she was, the Omega the king had tried and rejected. And if it was real? She asked. Draven finally looked at her, really looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the abyss, the endless depths of suffering he'd been carrying for years, the kind of pain that broke people, that turned them into monsters or ghosts or nothing at all. Then I'm going to be very selfish, he said quietly, and I'm going to ask you to save my life. He held out his hand. It was scarred, she noticed, old marks crisscrossing his knuckles, a jagged line across his palm. The hands of a warrior who'd fought for his kingdom, his people, his life. Trembling, Lyron reached out and took it. The moment their skin touched, the world shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no flash of light, no surge of power. Just a quiet settling, like pieces clicking into place. The pain that had been hammering at her awareness since the moment he'd entered the hall eased, not gone, but muted, manageable, bearable. And from the look on Draven's face, he felt it too. Oh, he breathed. Oh, goddess. His hand tightened on hers almost painfully. His eyes slid closed, and she watched as the tension drained from his shoulders, as the lines of agony bracketing his mouth smoothed. He wasn't healed. She could still feel the curse burning beneath his skin, but it was like she'd thrown a blanket over a fire. Still dangerous, still deadly, but contained. How? The word came out broken. I don't know, Lyran whispered. They stayed like that for a long moment, hands clasped, breathing in sync. She could feel his pulse under her fingertips, too fast but steadying. Could feel something else too, something she didn't have words for. A connection, a recognition. When Draven finally opened his eyes, they were clearer than before. The fever brightness had faded, replaced by something sharper, more aware, and more terrifying. You're staying, he said. It wasn't a question, but Lyran answered anyway. For how long? His smile was grim. As long as you can tolerate me, or until the curse kills me. Whichever comes first. I'm not asking for your love, he cut her off. I'm not even asking for your loyalty. I'm asking for your presence, for however long you can stand to be near me. In exchange, you'll have everything you need, safety, security, a position at court. All I need is your hand in mine and the ability to think clearly for the first time in a decade. It was a transaction, a business arrangement. The king needed relief from his curse, and she… What did she need? To not be invisible, to not be nothing, to matter to someone, even if that someone only needed her as a human pain medication. It was more than she'd had this morning. There's going to be a war, Lyran said quietly. The court will never accept me. Your advisors will call you mad. My family will… Let me worry about that. His grip on her hand tightened. I've survived 10 years of this curse. I can survive political fallout. But could she? Looking into his storm cloud eyes, feeling the steady beat of his pulse beneath her fingers, Lyran made a choice. Maybe it was stupid. Maybe it was reckless. Maybe it would destroy her. But for the first time in her life, someone needed her, really needed her. Not as a servant or a punching bag or a reminder of failure, but as herself. Okay, she whispered. The relief that flooded Draven's expression was so profound it hurt to witness. Thank you, he said, and meant it. Outside, Lyran could hear the court already beginning to whisper. Could imagine Helena's fury, Seraphina's outrage, the shock rippling through every pack in the kingdom, the Omega and the king. The girl no one saw and the man no one could touch. And in the firelight of the royal chambers, with their hands clasped and the curse temporarily quieted, they both knew the same truth. This was only the beginning. Dawn broke cold and merciless over Ashenwood Castle, and Lyran woke to find herself in a nightmare dressed as a palace. She'd spent the night in a guest chamber adjacent to the king's quarters, a room larger than the entire servants' wing she'd occupied at her stepmother's estate. The bed alone could have fit 6 people comfortably. The ceiling was painted with constellations she'd only read about in books. A wardrobe stood open, filled with gowns she hadn't chosen and wouldn't have dared touch yesterday. Yesterday. When she'd been invisible. When she'd been safe in her invisibility. Now she sat on the edge of that massive bed, still wearing the rumpled dress from the festival, and tried to understand what she'd done. A knock at the door made her jump. Miss Vale? A woman's voice, crisp and professional. I'm Mira, your lady's maid. The king has requested your presence at breakfast in 1 hour. Lyran stared at the door. Lady's maid, breakfast with the king. Words that belong to someone else's life. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat. I don't need a maid. With respect, miss, everyone in the royal wing has attendance. Palace protocol. A pause. May I enter? There was no refusing, was there? This was the king's command wrapped in courtesy. Lyran stood, smoothed her ruined dress, and opened the door. Mira was perhaps 40, with silver threading through her dark hair, and the kind of face that had seen everything and judged none of it. Her eyes swept over Lyran with professional assessment. Not cruel, just thorough. Right then, Mira said briskly, stepping inside. Bath first, I think. Then we'll see about getting you proper clothing. I can't afford… The king's treasury can. Mira was already moving toward a door Lyran hadn't noticed, which apparently led to a private bathing chamber. He's given instructions that you're to have everything you need. Now come along. Court convenes in 2 hours and they'll be watching every detail. The way she said it made Lyran's stomach drop. Not admiration. Warning. The bath was torture. Not because it was unpleasant, but because it was the first hot water she'd felt in months, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying at the simple luxury of it. Mira worked efficiently, washing Lyron's hair with something that smelled like lavender and honey, never commenting on the old bruises that marked her ribs, the scars on her wrists from rope burns, all the evidence of what family had meant for her. But she noticed. Lyron could tell. The dress Mira selected was simple compared to what Serafina would wear, deep blue wool, well-made but not ostentatious, with minimal jewelry. A choice, Lyron realized, something that wouldn't scream, "The king's trying to make his charity case look like a queen." "You're being kind," Lyron said quietly as Mira fastened the last button. "I'm being practical." But the woman's eyes softened slightly. "You're going to face wolves today, Miss Vale. Predators in silk. The less ammunition you give them, the better. They'll find ammunition regardless." True enough, Mira stepped back, surveying her work. "But let's not gift wrap it for them." A different knock sounded, heavier, more authoritative. Mira opened the door to reveal Lord Theron, the king's chief advisor. He looked like he hadn't slept, his weathered face drawn with exhaustion and something that might have been concern. "Miss Vale?" He inclined his head with a respect that felt surreal. "The king is waiting." Lyron followed him through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, each turn revealing more marble, more tapestries, more evidence of a world she didn't belong to. Servants pressed themselves against walls as they passed, their eyes tracking her with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. Word had spread fast. "Lord Theron," Lyron ventured, "what exactly am I walking into?" He glanced at her and she saw the calculation in his eyes, weighing how much truth she could handle. "The king announced his decision last night," Theron said carefully. "You're to remain at court as his companion, under his personal protection." Companion. The word tasted strange. Not mate. No. Theron's voice was flat. That would require a formal claiming ceremony and approval from the High Council. What the king has done is invoke an ancient provision, the right of a ruling alpha to keep any wolf under his direct protection for their mutual benefit. But the court is in an uproar. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Miss Vale, I'll be blunt. Half the nobility thinks the king has gone mad from the curse. The other half thinks you're some kind of witch who's manipulated him. Your stepmother has already filed formal complaints with 3 separate pack alphas. And that's just in the last 8 hours. Lyron felt the blood drain from her face. "Then why doesn't he just send me away?" "Because he can't." Theron's expression was grim. "I was with him this morning. For the first time in 10 years, he could sit through a strategy meeting without clawing at his own skin. He could read documents without the words blurring from pain. He could think." The advisor's voice dropped. "The king needs you, Miss Vale. And what the king needs, the kingdom needs. Even if the court can't see that yet." They reached a set of double doors carved with the royal wolf insignia. Theron pushed them open, and Lyron stepped into chaos. The breakfast chamber wasn't a private dining room. It was a war council disguised as a meal. 20 wolves occupied the long table, all of them high-ranking pack alphas or their representatives. All of them turned to stare as she entered. Draven sat at the head of the table, and the difference from last night was staggering. He still looked dangerous. That would never change. But the feverish edge was gone. His eyes were clear. His posture, while still tense, lacked yesterday's barely controlled agony. He looked like a king instead of a dying man playing pretend. "Ah," Draven said, his voice carrying easily through the sudden silence. "Miss Vale, please, join us." There was an empty chair to his right, the position of honor. Every wolf in the room clocked it immediately, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Lyron walked to that chair on legs that wanted to bolt, sat down with her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap, everything her father had taught her about dignity before he died and left her defenseless. "Now then," Draven continued, as if he hadn't just committed a massive breach of protocol. "Where were we? Lord Garrett, you were explaining the border disputes with the Shadowfang pack." Lord Garrett, an older alpha with silver in his beard and murder in his eyes, set down his cup with deliberate care. "Your Majesty, with respect, I find it difficult to focus on policy when there's an elephant in the room." "I see no elephants," Draven said mildly, "only wolves." "Then let's speak plainly. Lady Ashton, Alpha of the Northern Territories, leaned forward. You've brought an Omega to court. Worse, an Omega with no standing, no pack backing, no demonstrated value. And you've placed her at your right hand. The court is calling it madness. The court may call it whatever they wish. Draven's tone remained pleasant, but steel ran underneath. I am still king. A king who serves his people, Lord Garrett countered, not his personal whims. You owe us an explanation. The room held its breath. Lyran felt every eye on her, weighing, judging, finding her lacking. She wanted to sink through the floor, to disappear, to wake up in her attic room and discover this had all been a fever dream. Very well. Draven stood, and the authority in that simple movement made several wolves flinch back. Since you demand an explanation, here it is. Miss Vale has a unique ability. In her presence, the curse that has plagued me for 10 years eases enough for me to function, to rule, to serve this kingdom properly instead of surviving minute by minute. Silence. Then, you're asking us to believe an Omega, the weakest rank, can do what trained healers, powerful Lunas, and countless others have failed to achieve? Lady Ashton's voice dripped skepticism. I'm not asking you to believe anything. Draven's eyes flashed silver. I'm telling you a fact, and if that fact offends your sensibilities about rank and power, that's your problem, not mine. It's everyone's problem, Lord Garrett snapped. You've disrupted the entire social order over a curse that everyone knows can only be eased by a true mate. What happens when this effect wears off? When she fails, you'll have caused a constitutional crisis for nothing. And if it doesn't wear off, Draven shot back, if I finally have a chance at clear-headed rule, then the kingdom gains a functional king instead of a dying one. Seems like a worthwhile gamble to me. At what cost? Lady Ashton gestured at Lyran without looking at her. She's a Vale, yes, but that bloodline has been in decline for years. No offense to her late father, but the daughter can't even shift. She's... Enough! The word cracked like a whip. Draven's power flooded the room, pressing down on everyone except Lyran. She felt it wash over her, felt the curse trying to escape, to hurt, to destroy. But it softened when it reached her, gentled by whatever strange connection they shared. The others weren't so lucky. Several wolves gasped. Lord Garrett's hand went white-knuckled on his fork. Lady Ashton actually shrank back in her chair. You will not, Draven said softly, dangerously, discuss Miss Vale's worth in her presence as if she isn't here. You will not reduce her to her rank or her bloodline, and you will remember that I am still your king, curse or no curse, and I don't require your permission to make decisions for my own household. Lord Garrett recovered first, straightening in his chair. Your household, perhaps. But this affects the entire kingdom. Pack Alphas are already questioning your judgment. Several have sent messengers demanding an explanation. Lady Helena Vale herself has... Lady Helena has no authority here, Draven cut him off. Miss Vale is of age. She's made her own choice. Had she? Lyran kept her face carefully blank, but inside panic clawed at her ribs. This was worse than she'd imagined. These weren't just courtiers gossiping. These were pack leaders, the wolves who controlled territories and armies, and they were all united in their belief that she didn't belong here. If I may speak? The voice came from the far end of the table, Alpha Tauren of the Eastlands, younger than the others, with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. Everyone turned to look at him. The king is right, Tauren said calmly. He doesn't need our permission, but he does need our support, and that requires trust. So here's what I propose. Let Miss Vale prove herself. Give her 1 month to demonstrate that her presence benefits the kingdom, not just the king's comfort. If she succeeds, the court accepts her. If not, he shrugged. Then we revisit this conversation. It was a trap dressed as compromise. Lyran saw it immediately. How exactly was she supposed to prove herself to people determined to see her fail? What did success even look like for an Omega at court? But Draven was nodding slowly. 1 month, and during that time, no sabotage, no interference, no manufacturing crises to ensure her failure. Agreed? Agreed, Tauren said. Around the table, reluctant nods. They didn't like it, but it gave them a timeline. A hope that this embarrassment would be temporary. Excellent. Draven sat down, his hand finding Lyran's under the table. The touch sent relief flooding through both of them. She felt the curse ease further, felt his shoulders relax fractionally. Now, Lord Garrett, about those border disputes? The meeting continued, but Lyran barely heard it. Her mind was spinning with the magnitude of what had just happened. 1 month to prove she wasn't a mistake. 1 month before the court would demand her removal. 1 month to figure out how to survive in a world that wanted her gone. When the breakfast finally ended, the wolves filed out, each one making a point of not looking at Lyran as they passed, all except Alpha Tauren, who paused beside her chair. "A word of advice, Miss Vale," he said quietly. "Don't try to be something you're not. They'll destroy you for it. But if you can find a way to be useful, truly useful, you might survive." He left before she could ask what he meant. Draven stood, still holding her hand. "Come. We have work to do." "Work?" Lyran's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "I'm the king. Work never stops." He pulled her gently toward a side door. "But at least now I can do it without wanting to claw my own brain out." They spent the morning in his study, and Lyran discovered what work meant for a king. Endless documents, trade agreements, dispute resolutions, letters from pack alphas with concerns ranging from legitimate to paranoid. Draven worked through it all with a focus she suspected was new, pausing occasionally when the curse flared and his hand would find hers across the desk, the touch bringing immediate relief. "How long have you been doing this alone?" she asked during one such pause. 10 years. He didn't look up from the document he was reviewing. "Since Alara died. Before that, she would help. She was good at seeing patterns I missed, at understanding the emotional undercurrents of pack politics. I'm not her." "I know." His eyes finally met hers. "I'm not asking you to be. I'm just grateful I can read a full paragraph without losing my train of thought halfway through. It was such a simple thing, such a basic requirement for functioning, and he'd been denied it for a decade." "Tell me about the curse," Lyran said. "How it works." Draven set down his pen, leaning back in his chair. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "It's like burning from the inside out. Every nerve ending on fire, every thought fractured by pain. It gets worse under stress, worse when I use my alpha power, worse when—" He paused. "Worse when I'm reminded of what I lost. Ilara's death nearly killed me, not from grief, though that was bad enough. The curse surged when she died, like it was punishing me for losing her. That's horrible. That's the point." His smile was bitter. "The witch who cast it wanted the Mordrake line to suffer. Every generation, the curse gets stronger. My grandfather could mostly function. My father struggled. Me?" He laughed without humor. "I'm barely holding on, and if I have a child, they'll have it worse." "You said you and Alara had a child, that he was stillborn." Pain flashed across Draven's face, raw and immediate. "Yes. The healers said the curse might have caused it, that the baby couldn't survive the power flowing through the bloodline. So I lost them both in one night, my mate and my heir." Lyran's chest ached with sympathy. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." He picked up his pen again, but his hand trembled slightly. "It's been 10 years. I should be past it." But grief didn't work that way. Lyran knew that from losing her father. Time didn't heal all wounds, it just taught you how to carry them. A knock interrupted them. Lord Theron entered without waiting for permission, his expression grave. "Your Majesty, we have a situation. Lady Helena Vale has arrived and is demanding an audience. She's brought half the court with her." Draven's jaw tightened. "Of course she has. It gets worse. She's invoked the right of family concern. Legally, you have to hear her petition regarding Miss Vale's welfare." Lyran stood so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "I should leave. If she sees me, it'll be worse." "No." Draven's voice was flat. "You're not running from her. Not anymore. You don't understand. Helena is a bully who's had free reign for too long." He stood, moving around the desk to face her. "This ends now. She doesn't control you anymore." "She controls my inheritance, my father's estate. Everything he left went to her when he died." "Your father was beta of the Bloodstone Pack," Draven said slowly. "His estate should have passed to his blood heir, not his widow. That's pack law." Lyran stared at him. "She said, Helena said the council ruled I was unfit to inherit. that an Omega couldn't manage. Did you see this ruling? Theron asked sharply. In writing? No. I was 12 when father died. Helena handled everything. Draven and Theron exchanged a look that made Lyron's stomach clench. Theron, have the archives pull the Bloodstone Pack records from 12 years ago, Draven ordered. Every document related to Marcus Vale's death and estate distribution. I want them on my desk by tonight. Your Majesty, if you're suggesting... I'm not suggesting anything yet, but if Lady Helena has been defrauding Miss Vale of her inheritance for over a decade, that changes things considerably. Hope flickered in Lyron's chest. Dangerous, fragile hope. You think she lied? I think your stepmother is about to have a very unpleasant afternoon, Draven said grimly. Theron, show her to the throne room, full court. I want witnesses. The throne room was packed. Wolves in formal dress lined every wall, their voices creating a hum of anticipation that stopped the moment Draven entered. Lyron walked beside him, her hand tucked into the crook of his elbow, feeling like she was marching to her own execution. Helena stood at the center of the room, Seraphina beside her. Both wore black, mourning colors, though for what, Lyron couldn't imagine. Behind them stood a delegation of pack members, all wearing expressions of righteous concern. It was a performance, a carefully staged intervention. Draven took his throne, and Lyron realized with horror that there was a smaller chair beside it. She hadn't noticed it last night, but of course it was there, the queen's seat, empty for 10 years. Sit, Draven murmured. I can't. You can. And you will. Lyron sat, feeling every eye in the room burning into her. The whispers started immediately, a wave of shock and outrage that made her skin prickle. Lady Helena, Draven's voice cut through the noise, you've invoked the right of family concern. State your petition. Helena stepped forward, her face arranged in perfect worry. Your Majesty, I come before you as a mother fearful for her daughter's well-being. Lyron Vale is fragile. She always has been, unable to shift, prone to melancholy, dependent on family guidance. I fear she's been overwhelmed by events she cannot understand and has made choices that aren't in her best interest. What choices would those be? Remaining at court, accepting your protection. Helena's voice dripped with false concern. Your Majesty, Lyron isn't equipped for life at court. She'll be hurt, used, discarded. As her family, we're obligated to protect her from herself. How noble, Draven said dryly. Tell me, Lady Helena, how exactly have you been protecting her up until now? Helena blinked. I beg your pardon? Simple question. Miss Vale is of age, of sound mind, and capable of making her own decisions. Yet you've traveled here with an entourage to publicly question her competence. That suggests you believe she's incapable of self-governance. So I'm asking, what actions have you taken as her guardian to demonstrate this protective concern you claim? The trap was sprung so smoothly that Helena didn't see it until she was already caught. Lyron watched her stepmother's mind work, searching for an answer that wouldn't damn her. I've provided for her, Helena said finally. Given her a home, food, education. In exchange for what? Did she work for these provisions? Did she serve as a maid in your household, a servant? Helena's face flushed. She contributed to household duties, yes, but so she wasn't a dependent daughter. She was unpaid labor. Draven leaned forward. Tell me, Lady Helena, did you ever once take her to a healer to assess why she couldn't shift? Did you hire tutors to help her develop other skills? Did you present her to other packs as available for mating, as is traditional for daughters of Beta blood? The silence was damning. No, Helena said stiffly. It seemed kinder not to raise hopes that could never... Kinder, Draven's voice could have cut glass. You kept her isolated, uneducated, beyond basic literacy, and working as a servant in the home that should have been partly hers by inheritance, right? And now you stand before me claiming this treatment was protective. Her father left everything to me, Helena snapped, her composure cracking. The estate, the title, all of it. The council confirmed. Did they? Draven gestured, and Theron stepped forward with a document case. Because, according to the records Lord Theron just retrieved from the archives, there was no formal ruling. Marcus Vale's will left his estate to his blood heir, Lyren, with you as trustee until she came of age. A trusteeship that should have ended 8 years ago. The room erupted. Lyren sat frozen, her mind unable to process what she was hearing. The estate was hers? Had been hers for years? That's not... I was told... Helena was stammering now, all pretense of calm gone. You were told wrong, or you lied. Draven stood, and his power filled the room like a physical presence. Either way, you've defrauded Miss Vale of her inheritance and reduced her to a servant in her own home. That's theft and abuse under pack law. She's my stepdaughter, Helena's voice rose to a shriek. I raised her after her father died. You exploited her. Draven descended from the throne, each step measured and terrible. And now you have the audacity to come to my court, invoke family rights you violated for over a decade, and try to take her back. So let me be absolutely clear. Miss Vale is under my personal protection. She's not going anywhere. And you, Lady Helena, are about to face an investigation into every financial transaction you've made since Marcus Vale's death. Helena's face went white. You can't. I'm the king. I can do whatever I want. He smiled, and it was the expression of a predator. Now get out of my throne room. And if you ever try to contact Miss Vale again, if you so much as speak her name in public, I will have you stripped of every title and property Marcus Vale left behind. Do you understand? Helena looked like she wanted to argue. Then her eyes met Draven's, and whatever she saw there made her shrink back. Yes, Your Majesty, she whispered. She fled. Seraphina and the others followed, leaving the court in stunned silence. Draven turned to face the assembled wolves. Let this be a lesson. Miss Vale is mine to protect. Anyone who threatens her, undermines her, or attempts to use her past against her will answer to me personally. Is that clear? A chorus of "Yes, Your Majesty" filled the room, but Lyren barely heard it. She was still processing the revelation that her entire life had been built on a lie, that Helena had stolen from her, had kept her ignorant of her own rights, had made her believe she was nothing when she'd actually been the rightful heir all along. The rage that filled her chest was new, terrifying, exhilarating. As the court dispersed, Draven returned to her side. Are you all right? I don't know, Lyren said honestly. I think I just discovered I've been a prisoner for 12 years and didn't even know it. You're free now. His hand found hers. Whatever you want to do about the estate, the inheritance, all of it, that's your choice. Not hers, not anyone's. Free. The word felt foreign. But as Lyren looked around the throne room, seeing the wolves who still watched her with suspicion and hostility, she understood the truth. She'd escaped one prison only to find herself in another. This time, though, she wasn't alone. And somehow, that made all the difference. Then, the rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, documents, and carefully polite hostility from everyone they encountered. By evening, Lyren was exhausted, not physically, but emotionally. Every interaction was a battle, every conversation a test. Draven had insisted she dine with him in his private chambers, and now they sat across from each other at a small table, picking at food neither of them had much appetite for. It'll get easier, Draven said, breaking the silence. Will it? Lyren set down her fork. They hate me, all of them, and I can't even blame them. I'm nobody. I can't shift, I can't fight, I can't do anything useful except... What? Exist near you? You underestimate what that means. Draven's eyes were serious. For 10 years, I've ruled this kingdom while dying by inches. Every decision made through a haze of pain. Every strategy compromised because I couldn't think straight long enough to see it through. You've given me clarity. That's not nothing. It's not enough. The words burst out before she could stop them. Alpha Tauren was right. I need to prove I'm useful beyond just standing next to you. But how? I have no skills, no training, no... Stop. Draven's hand shot across the table, catching hers. You survived 12 years in a hostile household. You stayed kind when the world gave you every reason to be cruel. You saw past my curse to the person underneath. Those are skills, Lyren. Rare ones. They won't impress the court. Then we'll find something that will. He squeezed her hand gently. 1 month. That's what we have. And I promise you we'll find a way. But the promise felt hollow in the face of what they both knew. The court wanted her gone, and 1 month was no time at all. A commotion outside the door made them both tense, raised voices. Then a crash. Draven was on his feet instantly, positioning himself between Lyran and the door as it burst open. A guard stumbled in, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "Your Majesty! Ambush in the East Wing! Assassins!" He collapsed. Behind him, 3 figures in black flooded into the room, blades drawn, faces covered. They moved with lethal precision, spreading out to flank and corner. Assassins. In the palace. Targeting the king. Or Lyran realized with ice-cold clarity as one broke away from the others and charged directly at her, targeting the king's weakness. Draven's roar shook the walls as his power exploded outward. The curse, unleashed in his fury, hit the assassins like a physical blow. 2 dropped to their knees, crying out in agony. The third kept coming. Lyran grabbed the only weapon in reach, a heavy candlestick from the table, and swung it with everything she had. It connected with the assassin's temple with a sickening crack. The figure crumpled. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Draven was there, pulling her away from the body, checking her for injuries with frantic hands. "Are you hurt? Did they—" "I'm fine," she was shaking. "I'm fine, but you, the curse, is contained now that you're touching me." His laugh was slightly unhinged. "You just saved both our lives." Guards poured into the room, securing the assassins. Lord Theron appeared, his face ashen. "Sire, we're sweeping the palace. There may be more." "Find them." Draven's voice was steel. "And find out who sent them." But Lyran already knew. They all knew. This was the court's answer to her presence, and it had only been 1 day. This was the court's answer to her presence, and it had only been 1 day. The palace lockdown lasted through the night. Guards swept every corridor, every room, every shadowed corner where treachery might hide. They found 2 more assassins, one dead by his own hand, the other captured alive but refusing to speak. By dawn, the Eastern Wing looked like a war zone, and Lyran sat in Draven's study watching the king interrogate the survivor with a cold fury that made her blood run ice. "Who sent you?" Draven's voice was conversational, but his power pressed against the assassin like a physical weight. The man was chained to a chair, blood trickling from his nose where the curse's proximity had ruptured something inside him. "Go to hell," the assassin spat. "I've been there for 10 years. Draven leaned closer, and the man screamed, "Answer the question." "Can't. Kill me. Doesn't matter." The assassin convulsed, foam appearing at his mouth. Poison, Lyran realized with horror. He'd bitten through something concealed in his teeth. Within seconds, he was dead. Draven slammed his fist against the wall hard enough to crack stone. "Damn it!" Lord Theron stood in the doorway, his face grave. "That's all 4, sire. All chose death over capture. Professional. Well-funded. And clearly willing to die rather than expose their employer. Which tells us everything we need to know." Draven turned to face his advisor, and Lyran saw the exhaustion carved into his features. The interrogation had taken hours, and without her touch to ease the curse, the pain had been building. This came from inside the court. No outside force would have access to the palace, knowledge of our routines, or ability to coordinate an attack this precise. "Several dozen nobles had means and motive," Theron said carefully. "Narrowing it down will take time we may not have." "Then we don't narrow it down." Draven's eyes found Lyran across the room. "We prepare for the next attack, because there will be one." She'd known that, had felt it in her bones since the moment that assassin had charged her with murder in his eyes. But hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that turned her stomach. "Your Majesty," Theron hesitated. "There's another matter. The blood moon rises in 3 days." The temperature in the room dropped. Draven went absolutely still, and Lyran watched something like terror flicker across his face before he locked it down. "I'm aware," he said flatly. "Sire, given recent events, perhaps it would be wise to move Miss Vale to a secure location outside the palace, just for that night." "No." The word was final. "Draven." Theron rarely used the king's name without title, and it spoke to his concern. "You know what happens during the blood moon. The curse amplifies. You lose control. Last time, it took 6 guards to contain you, and 2 of them didn't survive the experience." Lyran's blood went cold. What does he mean, lose control? Neither man answered immediately. Draven had turned away, his shoulders rigid, and Theron looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Someone explain, Lyran said, her voice sharper than she'd intended. Now. It was Draven who finally spoke, his voice hollow. The Mordrake curse has cycles. During normal days, it's manageable, barely. During times of stress or when I use significant power, it flares. But during the blood moon, which occurs every 6 months, it takes over completely. The pain becomes so intense that He paused, jaw working. I'm not myself. The beast inside, the wolf that every alpha carries, it breaks free. And it's not rational, not controllable. It's just pain and rage made manifest. He transforms, Theron added quietly, but not into a normal wolf, into something else. Something the curse has twisted into a weapon that attacks anything near it. Lyran understood then why Theron wanted her gone, why Draven had gone so still at the mention of the blood moon. You're afraid you'll hurt me, she said. I'm certain I'll hurt you. Draven turned back, and the anguish in his eyes hit her like a blow. I've hurt everyone who's been near me during the transformation. The guards wear full armor and carry silver chains, and even then, people die. You? He laughed bitterly. You can't even shift to defend yourself. I'd tear you apart. Unless I can help, like I do now. We don't know that. His voice rose, frustration and fear bleeding through. Whatever connection we have, whatever eases the curse in my human form, there's no guarantee it works when I'm the monster, and I will not risk your life on a theory. It's not your choice. The words came out before Lyran fully processed them, but once spoken, she knew they were true. This was her decision, her risk to take. Like hell it's not, Draven growled. I'm the king. Your safety is my responsibility. I'm not your subject. Lyran stood, crossing to him despite the instinct that screamed to keep distance from a predator this dangerous. I'm here by my own choice, and I'm choosing to stay through the blood moon. You're choosing suicide. Maybe, or maybe I'm choosing to be the only person brave enough to stand beside you when you need it most. She grabbed his hand before he could pull away and felt his whole body shudder as relief from the curse flooded through him. You've been alone with this for 10 years. I think that's long enough. Draven stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. But something in her, some stubborn core that had survived 12 years of Helena's cruelty, refused to back down. This is insane, Draven said finally. Probably. Lyran managed a weak smile. But then so is everything else I've done in the last 48 hours. Theron cleared his throat. If Miss Vale insists on staying, we should take precautions. Reinforced chambers, silver restraints, a medical team standing by. And if none of it works? Draven's grip on her hand tightened almost painfully. If I kill her? Then at least she made her own choice about how to die, Theron said quietly. Which is more than most people get. It was a grim assessment, but accurate, and somehow that made it easier to accept. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and mounting tension. The court, already hostile, turned positively venomous once word spread about the blood moon. Wolves who'd been coldly polite became openly aggressive. Accidents plagued Lyran's daily routine, near misses with falling objects, servants delivering meals laced with herbs that caused nausea, whispered threats in hallways that emptied before guards could respond. They want me to run, Lyran said the second evening, watching from a window as the moon waxed fuller. If I leave before the blood moon, they can say I abandoned the king, that I was weak, useless. They're not wrong about the danger, Draven said from his desk, where he'd been trying and failing to focus on correspondence. The curse was already building. She could feel it. His movements were jerky, his breathing shallow. Even with her nearby, the approaching blood moon sent waves of anticipatory agony through him. How bad does it get? She asked. Before the transformation. Imagine every nerve in your body on fire, every thought fractured by pain so intense you can't remember your own name. Then multiply that by 1,000. His pen snapped in his grip. And that's just the hour before. During the actual transformation, he trailed off, shaking his head. What happens to your mind? Are you aware? Sometimes? His voice dropped. I remember fragments, rage, terror, the need to make the pain stop by any means necessary. But mostly it's just nothing. A void where I should be, and the monster wearing my skin. You're not a monster. You haven't seen me yet, but she would. In less than 48 hours, she'd see exactly what the curse had made of him, and either her presence would help or she'd die learning that some things couldn't be fixed by standing firm. The assassination attempts continued. 2 more in as many days, a poisoned wine glass intercepted by Mira, who'd grown fiercely protective of Lyran, and a crossbow bolt that missed her head by inches during a morning walk through the gardens. Draven assigned her a permanent guard detail, but even they looked at her with a mixture of pity and incomprehension. Why would anyone stay in the path of this much danger? Lyran asked herself the same question. The honest answer, that she had nowhere else to go, no other life to return to, felt too pathetic to speak aloud. But there was more to it than that. Something about Draven's pain called to her own. 2 broken people, both surviving impossible circumstances, both refusing to surrender even when surrender would be easier. She couldn't save herself. But maybe, impossibly, she could save him. The night before the blood moon, Lord Theron summoned her to a private meeting in the war room. She went, flanked by guards, and found not just the advisor, but Alpha Torrin and 3 other pack leaders waiting. Miss Vale, Torrin gestured to a chair. Thank you for coming. Did I have a choice? She sat, wary, always. His expression was serious. We wanted to speak with you away from the king's hearing, about tomorrow night. If you're here to convince me to leave, we're here to make sure you understand what you're facing. Lady Ashton leaned forward, and for once her hostility had been replaced by something that might have been concern. The king during a blood moon transformation isn't the man you know. He's a force of nature, unstoppable, utterly lethal. I'm aware. Are you? Lord Garrett's voice was harsh. 3 years ago, his own brother tried to stay with him during the transformation. Thought their bond would protect him. We found pieces of him scattered across 3 rooms. The image made Lyran's stomach churn, but she kept her face neutral. The king already told me people have died. People have died trying to restrain him from outside the chamber, Torrin corrected. You're planning to be inside with him. That's not bravery, Miss Vale. That's suicide. Then why are you warning me? If you want me gone, letting me die would solve your problem. The silence that fell was telling. Because despite our doubts about your presence at court, Lady Ashton said slowly, we don't actually want to watch you be torn apart. You're misguided, not evil. How generous! Lyran couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. We're trying to save your life, Lord Garrett snapped. The king has ordered the transformation chamber prepared. Silver chains, reinforced walls, a medical team. But none of it will matter if he gets loose. And he always gets loose. Then I'll help him not get loose. You're an Omega who can't shift. Lady Ashton's composure cracked. What exactly do you think you can do against an Alpha King in full beast form? I don't know, Lyran admitted, but I'm going to try anyway. They stared at her like she'd announced plans to walk into the sun. You really mean it, Torrin said finally, something like wonder in his voice. You're actually going through with this? Yes. Why? The question hung in the air. Why risk everything for a man she'd known less than a week? Why throw her life away for a king who couldn't save her from his own curse? Because he spent 10 years alone with this, Lyran said quietly. Because everyone else runs, and I know what that feels like. To be the person everyone runs from. She met each of their eyes in turn. I'm not running. Whatever happens tomorrow night, at least he won't be alone. Lord Garrett shook his head slowly. You're braver than I thought, or more foolish, probably both. Definitely both, Lyran agreed. The meeting ended shortly after, the pack leaders departing with expressions that ranged from respect to resignation. Only Torrin lingered. One more thing, he said. If you survive tomorrow night, and I truly hope you do, the court will have to accept you. No one will be able to question your worth after that. And if I don't survive? Then at least you'll die having proven something impossible. He smiled grimly. Sometimes that's the best any of us can hope for. She returned to Draven's chambers to find him pacing like a caged animal. The curse was ramping up, visible in every tense line of his body, every stuttered breath. When she entered, he turned to her with eyes that had gone more silver than blue. It's starting, he said unnecessarily. The pull, the pain. I can feel the moon rising even though it's still hours away. Liren crossed to him, took his hands in hers. The relief was instant but incomplete, like trying to cool a forest fire with a bucket of water. It helped, but it wasn't enough. I need you to promise me something, Draven said urgently. If I break free tomorrow night, if the transformation goes wrong, you run. You don't try to help, you don't hesitate, you just run and let the guards handle it. No. Liren, I'm not promising that. She squeezed his hands. I'm staying, all the way through, whatever happens. You could die. Oh, everyone dies eventually. At least this way, I'm choosing how. Draven pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. She felt him trembling, felt the curse building like a storm about to break. I don't deserve you, he whispered. You don't get to decide that. I do. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. And I'm deciding you're worth it. Something in his expression cracked. For a moment she thought he might cry. Then he kissed her, desperate and fierce and tasting like goodbye. When they finally broke apart, the moon had risen outside the window. Not full yet, but close. So close. It's time, Draven said, his voice already roughening. The chamber is ready. The transformation chamber was deep in the castle's oldest section, carved from solid rock and reinforced with iron and silver. It looked less like a room and more like a prison cell, which Liren supposed was exactly what it was. Silver chains hung from the walls. Deep gouges scored the stone floor, claw marks from previous transformations. The air smelled like metal and fear. A dozen guards stood ready, all wearing full armor and carrying weapons Liren hoped they wouldn't need. The medical team waited outside, and Lord Theron stood by the door with an expression of grim determination. Last chance, Draven said, even as his body began to shake. You can still leave. Stop asking. Liren stepped into the chamber. I'm staying. The guards moved to chain Draven to the wall, thick silver links that hissed against his skin. He endured it stoically, but she could see what it cost him. The curse was fighting the restraints, fighting everything. Once the transformation begins, it moves fast, Theron explained to Liren. You'll have maybe 30 seconds before he's fully changed. Stay against the far wall. Don't approach unless he's clearly in control. And if anything goes wrong, I know. Run! She didn't mention that she had no intention of following that advice. The moon rose higher. Draven's breathing turned ragged, then agonized. His eyes, when they met hers, were already more wolf than man. Close the door, he gasped. Now. Theron hesitated, looking at Liren. She nodded. The heavy iron door swung shut with a sound like a tomb ceiling. And then it was just the two of them, the cursed king and the Omega who'd refused to abandon him. Draven lasted maybe 3 minutes before the transformation took him. It started with his hands, bones cracking and reforming with sounds that made Liren's stomach turn. His back arched, muscles tearing and rebuilding. The chains held, but barely, groaning under the strain as his body expanded and shifted. The screams were the worst part. Not animal sounds, but human. Draven's voice breaking as the curse ripped him apart from the inside. Then suddenly, silence. The thing that stood where Draven had been was massive, easily 8 feet tall, with fur black as midnight and eyes that glowed silver blue in the chamber's dim light. The chains strained, pulling taut as the beast tested them with casual strength that bent the iron mountings. This was the monster, the thing the curse had made, and it was looking directly at Liren. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The beast's eyes were alien, inhuman, filled with pain and rage, and something that might have been recognition or hunger. Then the chain snapped. Not broke. Snapped. Like thread. The beast took one step forward, and Liren understood with absolute certainty that she was about to die. This thing could tear her apart as easily as breathing. There was no defense, no escape, no... Draven, she said. The beast froze. I know you're in there somewhere. Her voice shook, but she kept talking. I know the curse is overwhelming. I know it hurts. But you're still you. You're still the king who survived 10 years of this, who rules despite impossible pain, who's strong enough to carry this burden. The beast snarled, a sound that vibrated in her chest. It took another step. Liren did the unthinkable. She stepped toward it. I'm not running. I told you I wouldn't, and I meant it. Another step. The beast was close enough now that she could feel its breath, hot and rank. You don't have to be alone with this. Not anymore. Its massive head tilted, and for just a moment something almost human flickered in those glowing eyes. Then the pain surged again. She could feel it through their connection, a wave of agony so intense it drove the beast to its knees. It roared, claws tearing gouges in the stone floor, body convulsing. Lyran didn't think. She just moved. Her hands found the beast's face, cupping the massive jaw despite every instinct screaming to run. The fur was coarse under her palms, the heat radiating from it almost unbearable. She felt muscles bunching beneath her touch, felt the power coiled there ready to strike. I'm here, she whispered. You're not alone. I've got you. For a long moment, nothing happened. The beast could have killed her a dozen different ways, could have bitten her head off, torn her apart, crushed her against the wall. Instead, it went still. The pain, that overwhelming tsunami of agony she'd been feeling since the transformation, began to ease. Not disappear, but soften, like she was drawing it into herself, diluting it across two souls instead of one. She felt the curse recognize her presence, felt it adjust. The beast's eyes cleared slightly. Its breathing, which had been harsh and panicked, steadied. That's it, Lyran murmured, stroking the fur along its jaw. That's it. I'm here. We're okay. The massive body sank down fully, and suddenly Lyran was kneeling in front of it, hands still on its face, maintaining contact. The beast, Draven, watched her with an intensity that should have been terrifying, but somehow wasn't. You're still you, she said softly. The curse can't take that away. Not completely. Not while I'm here. A sound rumbled from the beast's chest. Not a growl. Something else. Something almost like relief. They stayed like that for what felt like hours. Lyran murmuring reassurances, the beast slowly relaxing under her touch. The connection between them strengthened, deepened, until she could almost feel his thoughts beneath the curse's influence. Pain, yes. Rage, absolutely. But also confusion, gratitude, and underneath it all, a desperate hope that this moment of clarity might last. Outside, she could hear voices. Guards shouting. Theron calling for a report. The sounds faded to background noise. Nothing mattered except maintaining this fragile peace. Eventually, the beast's eyes began to drift closed. The curse was still there, would always be there. But for now, it was contained, manageable. Lyran felt the exact moment Draven's consciousness surfaced. The beast's eyes snapped open, suddenly filled with human awareness and absolute horror. No, the word came out distorted, half human, half wolf. No, you... Why... Shh. It's okay. I could have killed you. Even in beast form, the anguish in his voice was clear. I should have... The chains broke. Why didn't you run? Because you didn't want to hurt me. Lyran kept her hands steady on his face. I could feel it. Under the rage and the pain, you were fighting to stay in control. And when I touched you, it helped. It worked. The beast, Draven, made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Then, slowly, impossibly, he began to change back. It took longer than the transformation had. His body fought the reversal, the curse trying to maintain its hold. But with Lyran's touch anchoring him, Draven forced himself back into human form through sheer will. By the time the door burst open, guards flooding in with weapons drawn, Draven knelt on the floor in human form, Lyran's hands still cupping his face, both of them shaking with exhaustion and something that felt dangerously close to triumph. Lord Theron stopped dead in the doorway, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and what might have been hope. The chains broke, he said stupidly. We heard them snap. We thought, she stayed, Draven interrupted, his voice raw. The Omega everyone said was useless just tamed a curse 3 centuries old. The guards stared. Then, slowly one by one, they began to lower their weapons. How? Lady Ashton's voice came from behind them. She must have been watching, along with half the court, waiting to witness Lyran's death. Instead, they'd witnessed a miracle. I don't know, Lyran admitted, pulling her hands back. Draven immediately caught them, keeping her close. I just Felt like it was the right thing to do. To stay. To not run. No one's ever done that before, Theron said quietly. Everyone runs, or tries to fight, but you just stayed. Maybe that's what he needed all along. Lyran met Draven's eyes, saw the wonder and disbelief still warring there. Someone who wouldn't abandon him when things got hard. Alpha Tauren appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene. His expression was unreadable for a long moment. Then he did something Lyran never expected. He bowed, deeply. Miss Vale, he said formally, I believe I owe you an apology. We all do. But before Lyran could respond, Draven's body went rigid. His eyes rolled back and he collapsed, unconscious. Get the healers! Theron was already moving, barking orders. Now! Lyran found herself shoved aside as the medical team swarmed in, checking Draven's pulse, his breathing, working with practiced efficiency. She backed against the wall, her legs finally giving out, sliding down to sit on the cold stone floor. She'd done it. She'd survived. They both had. But as the healers loaded Draven onto a stretcher and rushed him out, as the guards secured the chamber and the court began to whisper in awed tones, Lyran felt something shift inside her. Not just relief or exhaustion, though both were there in abundance. Power. For the first time in her life, she'd done something that mattered, something impossible, something that no one else, not the strongest alpha, not the most skilled healer, not anyone, had been able to do. She'd proven her worth in the most brutal way imaginable, and everyone had witnessed it. The healers worked on Draven through the night in his private chambers, and Lyran wasn't allowed anywhere near him. She sat outside the door, flanked by guards, who no longer looked at her with contempt, but with something closer to awe. Or fear, she couldn't tell which. Maybe both. Mira appeared sometime before dawn with clean clothes and a cup of tea that Lyran's hand shook too badly to hold. Drink, Mira commanded, pressing the cup into her palms and steadying them. You're in shock. I'm fine. You're not. Mira's voice was gentle but firm. You just did something no one in 300 years has managed. You're allowed to fall apart a little. But Lyran couldn't afford to fall apart, not when she could hear the whispers already spreading through the palace like wildfire. Not when she could feel the weight of expectation settling onto shoulders that had never been meant to carry anything heavier than a serving tray. The door opened. Lord Theron emerged, his face gray with exhaustion, but his eyes sharp. He's stable, Theron said before Lyran could ask. Exhausted. The transformation took more out of him than usual, probably because he fought so hard to maintain control. But he'll recover. Can I see him? He's asking for you. Theron stepped aside, and Lyran caught the way his expression shifted, not quite respect yet, but definitely reassessment. Miss Vale, what you did tonight, I just stayed. That's all. That's everything. He held her gaze. The court saw. The pack leaders saw. You can't go back to being invisible after this. She knew. The knowledge sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and immovable. She'd wanted to prove her worth, and she had. Now she'd have to live with the consequences. Draven was propped against pillows when she entered, his skin still too pale, dark circles under his eyes that made him look almost fragile. The illusion shattered the moment those storm blue eyes found hers and lit with something fierce and desperate. You're alive, he said, his voice hoarse. So are you. Lyran crossed to the bed, unsure whether to sit or stand or what she was even allowed to do now. Everything felt different, wrong, changed. Draven solved the problem by reaching for her hand. The moment their skin touched, relief flooded through both of them, the curse settling like a wild animal finally allowed to rest. I remember, he said quietly. Not everything, but enough. The chains breaking, you walking toward me instead of away, your hands on my face when every instinct should have told you to run. I told you I wasn't running. I thought. His grip tightened. For 10 years, everyone who stayed with me during the transformation has died or been maimed. I was so certain you'd be next. When the chains broke, I felt the curse surge and knew I'd kill you. I tried to fight it, tried to maintain some control, but the pain was... I know. She squeezed back. I felt it too. That's why I knew you needed help. You felt the curse? His eyes widened. During the transformation? Not as intensely as you, but yes. It was like... She searched for words. Like standing next to a bonfire. The heat was overwhelming, but I could still function. And when I touched you, it cooled. Not extinguished, but manageable. Draven stared at her like she'd just explained quantum physics. That shouldn't be possible. The curse is mine. No one else feels it. They just feel the pressure it creates, the pain it radiates. But you're saying you actually felt the curse itself? I don't know how else to describe it. Lyran frowned. Is that not what everyone experiences? No? He sat up straighter, ignoring the healer's protests. No, that's... Lyran, I think you might be sharing the curse somehow, taking part of the burden onto yourself. The implications hit her like cold water. That's why it helps when I touch you. I'm not blocking the curse. I'm splitting it between us. Which means you've been carrying half my agony for the past week and never said anything. Draven's voice was rough with something between awe and horror. It's not that bad. Don't lie to me. His free hand cupped her face. I know what this curse feels like. If you're carrying even a fraction of it, you're in constant pain. Why didn't you tell me? Because it's manageable for me. And for you, it's the difference between functional and broken. She met his eyes. That seemed more important than my comfort. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he pulled her close, wrapping arms around her that trembled slightly. She let herself sink into the embrace, let herself admit, just for a moment, how exhausted she was, how much the last week had cost. I'm going to make an announcement, Draven said against her hair. Today, in front of the full court. I'm declaring you under my permanent protection and giving you a formal position at court. Lyran pulled back. What kind of position? I don't know yet. I'll figure something out. But you're not going back to being nobody. Not after this. The court will hate it. The court can... He stopped, reconsidered. The court will have to accept it. You survived the Blood Moon transformation. You tamed something 3 centuries of Mordrake kings couldn't control. They have no grounds to question you anymore. She wanted to believe that, but she'd seen the fear in the wolf's eyes last night, mixed with the awe. Fear was almost more dangerous than contempt. Fearful people made desperate choices. There's something else, Draven said, his expression darkening. The assassination attempts. We need to find out who's behind them before they try again. Do you have suspects? Half the court has motive, but the attempts have been too coordinated, too well-funded for a single actor. This is a conspiracy. His jaw tightened. And I'm going to burn it out root and branch. The announcement came at noon in the throne room, and the assembly was enormous. Every pack alpha, every noble family, every wolf of standing in the kingdom had been summoned. They filled the hall to capacity, their whispers creating a low roar of speculation. Lyran stood beside the throne in a gown Mira had selected, midnight blue with silver threading that caught the light. It was beautiful, formal, and made her feel like she was wearing someone else's skin. But it also sent a message. She belonged here, at the king's side. The whispers died when Draven entered. He looked recovered, more than recovered. The permanent tension that had bracketed his mouth, the exhaustion that had lined his face, both were diminished. Not gone, but lessened enough that he looked 10 years younger, strong, kingly, dangerous. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Draven said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. I have 2 announcements. First, as you all witnessed last night, the Blood Moon transformation was successfully contained. For the first time in a decade, I completed the change without casualties or collateral damage. This was due entirely to Miss Lyran Vale's presence and courage. The hall erupted in whispers. Draven let them build for a moment before continuing. Second, I am formally appointing Miss Vale as my royal advisor on curse management, a new position created to ensure that the kingdom continues to benefit from her unique abilities. She will have full access to the royal wing, a seat on certain councils, and my personal protection. The whispers exploded into open conversation. Lady Ashton stood, her face carefully neutral. Your Majesty, while we all recognize Miss Vale's contribution, last night, creating an entirely new position seems premature. Perhaps a period of observation first. I'm not asking for approval, Draven cut her off. I'm informing you of a decision already made. Miss Vale's position is effective immediately. Lord Garrett rose next. With respect, sire, the court has concerns. A week ago, Miss Vale was unknown. Now she's being elevated to advisor status? That's unprecedented, and it raises questions about her qualifications, her loyalties. Her qualifications? Draven's voice dropped to a tone that could have cut steel. She walked into a transformation chamber with a cursed king and survived. She tamed a beast that has killed trained warriors. She's sharing a 300-year-old curse to keep me functional. What exactly do you consider qualifying experience, Lord Garrett? The older Alpha sat down, his face flushed. But Alpha Tauren stood, and unlike the others, his expression was thoughtful rather than hostile. Your Majesty, no one questions Miss Vale's courage. But Lord Garrett has a point about precedent. Creating a royal position without consulting the High Council could be seen as overreach. Then let them see it that way. Draven's eyes swept the room. I'm the king. Miss Vale has demonstrated value to the kingdom. That's all the justification required. Is it? The voice came from the back. Cold, feminine, dripping with implication. Helena stepped forward from the crowd, Seraphina beside her. Both wore expressions of calculated concern. Or is there perhaps another reason you're so eager to keep her close? The temperature dropped. Lyran felt Draven's power surge beside her, felt the curse trying to escape his control. Careful, Lady Helena, Draven said softly. Very careful. I'm simply asking what we're all thinking. Helena's smile was poison wrapped in silk. You claim Miss Vale can manage your curse, but how convenient that this ability appeared exactly when she needed leverage. How do we know this isn't manipulation? A clever scheme by an Omega desperate for power? Because she has no power, Seraphina added, her voice carrying false sweetness. She never has. My stepsister is many things, but capable, strong, that's new. Lyran felt the familiar shame trying to claw its way up her throat. The old patterns, the old wounds, the voice that whispered they were right. She was nothing. Who did she think she was? Then Draven's hand found hers, and the shame burned away in a surge of anger that felt righteous and overdue. No, Lyran said, stepping forward. Her voice shook, but it carried. You don't get to do that anymore. Helena's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? You don't get to tear me down in public and pretend it's concern. Lyran felt something clicking into place, some core of steel she'd always had but never knew how to use. For 12 years you stole from me. You lied to me. You treated me like a servant in my own father's house. And when I finally escaped, when I finally found somewhere I might belong, you show up to destroy that too. Lyran, Helena's voice held warning. I'm not done. Lyran turned to address the whole court. You want to know if I'm manipulating the king? Fine. Let's test it, right now, in front of everyone. Draven's hand tightened on hers. Lyran, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She looked up at him. Let go of my hand. What? Let go. Let the curse free. Let everyone feel what you've been carrying for 10 years. She raised her voice. If I'm really manipulating you, if this is all a scheme, then me stepping away shouldn't matter. The curse should remain controlled, but if I'm telling the truth, if I really am helping manage it, then everyone's about to understand exactly what you've been surviving. Understanding dawned in Draven's eyes, followed immediately by protest. Lyran, they'll feel the pain. Some of them might. Good. She pulled her hand free. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The curse, freed from the dampening influence of her presence, exploded outward from Draven like a shockwave. Wolves throughout the hall cried out, dropping to their knees. Several fainted outright. Even the strongest alphas staggered, faces contorting in agony. Helena went white as snow. Seraphina collapsed, hands clutching her head, sobbing. Lyran walked down the steps from the throne, moving through the crowd. Everywhere she passed, wolves looked up at her with new understanding written in their tear-streaked faces. This was what their king had been enduring every second of every day for 10 years. This was the burden he'd carried while ruling them, protecting them, surviving alone. And this woman, this Omega they dismissed as worthless, could make it stop. She returned to Draven's side and took his hand. The curse immediately retreated, and the collective gasp of relief from the court was audible. "That," Lyron said into the ringing silence, "is what I do. Not manipulation, not scheming. I share his pain so he can function. And I'll keep doing it for as long as I can, because someone should. Because he deserves not to suffer alone." She turned to Helena, who was still trying to recover, leaning on Serafina for support. "So yes, I have power now. Not because I manipulated anyone, but because I'm willing to carry a burden no one else will touch. If that offends you, Lady Helena, you're welcome to challenge me. Stand beside the king without my presence for an hour and prove you're stronger." Helena's face twisted with fury and fear. You little... Enough! Draven's voice cut across whatever vitriol Helena had been about to spew. "You've made your point, Lady Helena, as has Miss Vale. Now I'll make mine. Anyone who questions her position again will answer to me personally. Anyone who threatens her, undermines her, or attempts to harm her will face charges of treason. And if I find proof that anyone in this room had anything to do with the assassination attempts on her life, I will show no mercy." He stood, and his power, even dampened by Lyron's presence, filled the throne room. "Miss Vale is under my protection. She is royal advisor. And if any of you have a problem with that, there's the door. Leave my kingdom and don't come back." No one moved. No one spoke. Then Alpha Tauren stepped forward and bowed, deeply. "Your Majesty, Miss Vale, you have my support." One by one, the other pack leaders followed suit. Some looked reluctant, some looked genuinely awed, but all of them bowed, all except Helena, who stood frozen, her face a mask of impotent rage. Finally, she turned and swept from the hall, Serafina scrambling after her. When they were gone, when the court had been dismissed, and only Draven, Lyron, and Theron remained, Lyron felt her legs start to shake. "That," Theron said quietly, "was the bravest and stupidest thing I've ever seen." "Stupid?" Lyron managed. "Releasing the curse could have caused permanent damage to some wolves, or deaths, if they were too weak." But Theron was smiling slightly. "But it was also the only way to make them understand. You gambled everything on them seeing the truth." "I gambled on them feeling the truth," Lyron corrected. "People can ignore what they see. They can't ignore pain." Draven pulled her close, and she let herself lean into him, exhaustion crashing over her in waves. "Don't ever do that again without warning me first." "Did it work?" "Too well. Half the court is probably having nightmares tonight." His arms tightened. "But yes, it worked. They can't deny you now." But the victory felt hollow. Because Lyron knew, they all knew, that this was just one battle. The war was far from over. The assassination attempts stopped, but something worse replaced them. Cold, calculating patience. The court accepted Lyron's presence because they had no choice, but acceptance wasn't the same as trust, or safety. Over the next week, Lyron attended council meetings where nobles spoke around her as if she weren't there. She sat at formal dinners where conversations died when she approached. She walked hallways where wolves stepped aside with expressions that mingled respect and resentment. She'd proven her worth, but she'd also proven her power. And powerful wolves who weren't born to power were threatening. "They're waiting," Draven said one evening as they reviewed documents in his study. "Watching for you to make a mistake, something they can use to undermine you." "I know." Lyron had felt the weight of those watching eyes for days. "How did you survive it? Years of this?" "Badly." His smile was grim. "I made enemies, lost allies, became the kind of king who ruled through fear because I couldn't rule through anything else." He looked at her. "You're already doing better. You have something I never had." "What's that?" "The court's conscience. You made them feel my pain. That's not something they'll forget easily. It'll haunt them." She hoped he was right, but hope was a fragile thing when surrounded by wolves who smiled with bared teeth. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Lyron was in the library, a massive room she'd discovered and immediately fallen in love with, when Alpha Tauren found her. He carried a folder thick with documents, his expression serious. "Miss Vale, we need to talk." She set down the book on curse theory she'd been reading. "About?" "About who tried to kill you." He sat without being invited, spreading documents across the table. "We've been investigating since the first attempt, following money trails, questioning servants, cross-referencing schedules, and we finally found something." Lyron's heart started to pound. Who? Not who. What? Torrin pulled out a ledger. The assassins were funded through a shell account that traces back to a group calling themselves the Purist Coalition. They're wolves who believe in strict rank hierarchy, that Omegas should never rise above their station, that diluting bloodlines with lesser wolves weakens the species. How many members? At least 50 confirmed, probably more who sympathize but aren't actively involved. And here's the problem. Several of them are nobles with access to the palace. We can't arrest them without proof of direct involvement, but we also can't let them continue operating. Liren felt sick. 50 wolves who want me dead. 50 wolves who want what you represent dead, Torrin corrected. You're a symbol now, Miss Vale. A Omega who rose to power through means they can't quantify or control. If you can do it, others might try. That terrifies them. What do I do? You prove them wrong. Torrin leaned forward. The Purist Coalition believes strength is only physical, that rank is destiny. You need to demonstrate that strength comes in forms they don't recognize. How? That's what I'm here to figure out. He pulled out another document. But first, we need to deal with the immediate threat. One of the Purist members is Lord Vance, the Alpha of the Westlands. He's hosting a gathering next week, officially a hunting party, but we suspect it's really a coalition meeting. If we can get someone inside, I'll go, Liren said immediately. Torrin blinked. You'll what? I'll go. If they're meeting to discuss me, I should be there. Miss Vale, they want you dead. Walking into their stronghold is suicide. No, it's a statement. Liren's mind was racing. They think I'm weak, that I only have power because the king protects me. If I show up at their meeting, uninvited, unafraid, it'll throw them off balance. Or it'll give them a perfect opportunity to kill you away from palace security. Not if the king comes with me. She stood, already moving toward the door. We need to talk to Draven, now. Draven hated the plan, hated it with a passion that would have been flattering if it weren't so frustrating. Absolutely not, he said for the third time. You're not walking into a nest of wolves who've already tried to kill you twice. They won't try anything in front of you, Liren argued. And if we expose them publicly, show everyone that the Purist Coalition has been orchestrating assassination attempts, their support collapses. Or you die and I spend the rest of my considerably shorter life hunting down everyone even tangentially involved. Draven's voice was flat. Pass. Your Majesty, Torrin interjected carefully. She has a point. The Coalition operates in shadows. Dragging them into daylight neutralizes their advantage. By using her as bait. By using me as proof that I'm not afraid, Liren corrected. Every day I hide in the palace, I prove them right, that I only have power through your protection. But if I face them directly, I prove I have strength of my own. Draven looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had, but something in her had shifted during that blood moon transformation. She'd faced down a monster and survived. Facing down wolves who hid behind shadows felt almost easier by comparison. If I say no, Draven asked quietly, then I'll respect your decision, but I'll regret it. And so will you eventually, because this problem doesn't go away by ignoring it. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he closed his eyes, his jaw working. Fine, but we do this my way, full security detail, exit strategies, and at the first sign of danger, you run. No arguments, no heroics, you just run. Agreed? Agreed, Liren lied. The hunting party took place at Lord Vance's estate, a sprawling territory in the Westlands that bordered wilderness so deep even experienced wolves thought twice about entering alone. The perfect place for a secret coalition meeting, isolated, defensible, and far from palace oversight. Draven and Liren arrived with a guard contingent of 20, all hand-picked by Theron. Lord Vance met them at the gate with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Your Majesty, what an unexpected honor. And Miss Vale. His gaze slid over her with barely concealed contempt. I wasn't aware you'd developed an interest in hunting. I haven't, Liren said pleasantly, but I've heard you're hosting some interesting guests this week. I thought I'd observe. Vance's smile froze. I'm afraid you're mistaken. This is a simple hunting party among friends. Then you won't mind if we join you, Draven said, his tone making it clear it wasn't a request. The estate grounds were filled with wolves, easily 100, all of them radiating hostility the moment Liren appeared. She recognized several faces from court, including Lady Ashton's son and two of Lord Garrett's nephews. They weren't even hiding it anymore. The hunting party was clearly a farce. No one had brought hunting gear. Instead, wolves stood in tight clusters, their conversations dying as Lyran passed. The message was clear. You're not welcome here. You're prey. This was a mistake, Draven murmured, his hand finding hers. We're leaving. Not yet. Lyran had spotted something, a tent set up at the far edge of the grounds, larger than the others with guards posted at the entrance. That's where they're meeting. I need to get in there. Over my dead body. If they kill me in front of the king, it's treason, and they know it. She squeezed his hand. Trust me. She walked toward the tent before he could stop her. Behind her, she heard Draven curse and follow, their guard detail scrambling to keep pace. The guards at the tent entrance moved to block her path. This area is restricted, Miss Vale, one said, his hand on his weapon. I'm the royal advisor. Nothing in this kingdom is restricted from me. Lyran met his eyes. Move. The lady said move. Draven's power flooded forward, and both guards dropped to their knees with gasps of pain. Lyran pushed through the tent flap. Inside, perhaps 30 wolves sat in a rough circle, their conversation stopping dead as she entered. She recognized most of them, nobles, pack representatives, wolves she'd seen at court. And at the center, sitting in a chair like a throne, was someone she hadn't expected. Lady Ashton. Miss Vale, Ashton's voice was cold steel. You're trespassing. Am I? This is a kingdom gathering. As royal advisor, I have every right to be here. Lyran's eyes swept the assembly. Though I'm curious what kind of hunting party requires such secrecy, unless you're hunting something other than game. The silence was damning. We're discussing policy, Ashton said carefully. Pack leadership concerns that don't involve the crown. Assassination attempts on royal advisors don't involve the crown. Lyran pulled out the documents Torin had given her and dropped them at Ashton's feet. Because, according to financial records, 3 members of this policy discussion have made payments to known assassins in the past 2 weeks. Should I read the names aloud, or would you prefer to explain yourself first? Ashton's face went white. Around the circle, wolves began to shift nervously. You have no proof, Ashton said, but her voice wavered. I have ledgers, bank transfers, testimony from one assassin who decided cooperation was better than execution. Lyran stepped closer. The Purist Coalition is finished, Lady Ashton. The only question is how many of you want to go down with it. This is entrapment, someone shouted. She came here to expose traitors, Draven said, entering the tent with Theron and a full guard complement behind him. Miss Vale gave you a chance to confess. I won't be so generous. Everyone in this tent is under arrest pending investigation. If you resist, my guards have orders to use lethal force. Chaos erupted. Several wolves tried to run. Others shifted into wolf form, snarling and snapping. But Draven's power crashed down on all of them like a hammer, driving them to the ground, and the guards moved in with silver chains that hissed against fur and skin. Lady Ashton remained in her chair, her face a mask of cold fury. You've won nothing, she said to Lyran. We're not the only ones who see you as a threat. Arresting us just makes you more enemies. Maybe, Lyran agreed. But at least now everyone knows what the cost is for trying to kill me. She turned and walked out, her head high, leaving the wreckage of the Purist Coalition behind her. Outside, the remaining hunting party guests were being rounded up for questioning. Several protested their innocence, and maybe some were innocent, caught up in something they didn't fully understand. But Lyran had learned a harsh truth over the past 2 weeks. In a world built on power, appearing weak was the most dangerous thing you could do. She wasn't weak anymore, and she'd just proven it to everyone who doubted. Draven caught up to her as they reached the carriages. His expression was complicated, pride and fear, and something that might have been love, if either of them had been ready to name it. That was reckless, he said. That was necessary. Lyran met his eyes. They needed to see I'm not just your shadow, that I have teeth of my own. You have teeth, he agreed. The question is whether having teeth makes you safer or just paints a bigger target on your back. She didn't have an answer to that. But as they rode back to the palace with Lady Ashton and 20 other coalition members in chains, as word spread through the kingdom of the Omega who'd brought down a conspiracy, Lyran felt something shift. The court had accepted her presence. Now they feared her power. And in a world of wolves, sometimes fear was the only respect you'd ever get. And in a world of wolves, sometimes fear was the only respect you'd ever get. The trials began 3 days later, and the kingdom held its breath. 27 wolves stood accused of conspiracy, attempted murder, and treason. The evidence was damning: financial records, testimony, intercepted correspondence that laid bare a network of hatred spanning years. But evidence meant nothing if the court chose to ignore it, and Lyran knew better than to assume victory before it was won. She sat beside Draven in the throne room as Lord Theron presented the case. Every seat was filled, every wolf in the kingdom watching to see how this would end. Would justice prevail, or would power protect its own? Lady Ashton stood at the center of it all, her spine straight, her expression carved from ice. She'd refused to plead, refused to show remorse, refused everything except contempt. The Crown accuses you of orchestrating 4 separate assassination attempts on royal advisor Lyran Vale, Theron recited. How do you plead? Not guilty, Ashton's voice carried through the hall. And I challenge the legitimacy of these proceedings. Miss Vale's position itself is illegal, created without High Council approval, granting power to someone of insufficient rank and breeding. If her position is illegitimate, crimes against her cannot be treason. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. It was a clever defense, attack the foundation rather than the evidence. If Ashton could prove Lyran's position was invalid, everything else collapsed. The king created Miss Vale's position by royal decree, Theron countered. That authority is absolute. Is it? Lord Garrett stood, his expression troubled. Your Majesty, with respect, Lady Ashton raises a valid point. Royal decrees typically require High Council consultation for positions of this level. The fact that you bypassed that process could be seen as what? Draven's voice was soft, dangerous. As me exercising the authority you all acknowledged when you swore fealty to the crown? Or as me doing something you personally disagree with? As precedent that could be abused, Garrett said carefully. If you can create positions without oversight, what stops future kings from elevating anyone they choose, regardless of qualification? The same thing that's always stopped it, the fact that stupid kings don't last long. Draven leaned forward. But let's address the real question here. You're not concerned about precedent. You're concerned that an Omega proved valuable enough to earn a position you think should be reserved for higher ranks. That's not a legal argument. That's prejudice dressed up as policy. The throne room erupted. Wolves shouting agreement, dissent, everything between. Lyran sat through it all, her hands folded in her lap, watching decades of hierarchy and tradition war with the uncomfortable truth of her existence. Finally, Alpha Tauren stood, and the room quieted. Your Majesty, if I may. He waited for Draven's nod. Lady Ashton's defense relies on the argument that Miss Vale's position is unprecedented and therefore invalid. But precedent has to start somewhere. 20 years ago, allowing Omegas to own property was unprecedented. 50 years ago, permitting them to testify in court was revolutionary. Change always feels wrong to those who benefit from the old order. This isn't change, Ashton snapped. This is chaos. An Omega with royal authority? What's next? Shall we crown every servant who catches the king's eye? Careful, Draven's power pressed against the room. Your contempt is showing. My honesty is showing. Ashton turned to face the full court. We're watching the erosion of everything that makes our society function. Rank exists for a reason. Hierarchy exists for a reason. Not to be cruel, but to maintain order. If anyone can rise to power through proximity to the crown, we lose the foundations that keep us strong. You mean the foundations that kept you in power? Lyran said quietly. Every eye turned to her. She hadn't planned to speak, but the words came anyway, rising from someplace deeper than fear or calculation. Lady Ashton, you talk about order and strength and foundations. But what you really mean is control. The control you've had for decades, deciding who matters and who doesn't based on accidents of birth. Lyran stood, her voice steady. I was raised to believe my worth was determined by my rank, that because I couldn't shift, I was less than nothing. And you know what that belief created? 12 years of abuse, theft, a girl so broken she thought invisibility was safety. The room was absolutely silent. But then I met someone who needed what I could give, and suddenly rank didn't matter anymore. Pain doesn't care about hierarchy. The curse doesn't ask what bloodline you carry. It just hurts, and I could help stop that hurt, so I did. That's not chaos, Lady Ashton. That's just being useful in a way your old order didn't have room to recognize. Pretty speech, Ashton said coldly. But it doesn't change the law. Then maybe the law needs to change. Lyran took a breath, knowing she was about to gamble everything. Your Majesty, I request trial by ordeal. The room exploded. Draven shot to his feet, his face going pale. Absolutely not. What kind of ordeal? Torin asked, speaking over the chaos. The same one we used a week ago, proximity to the curse. Lyran kept her eyes on Ashton. If I'm really just a weak Omega with no special ability, then anyone should be able to do what I do. Lady Ashton, you claim my position is illegitimate because I'm unqualified. Prove it. Stand beside the king without my presence for the same duration I do every day. If you can manage even an hour, I'll withdraw my position voluntarily. Ashton's face went white. I'm not claiming I can manage the curse. Then what are you claiming? Lyran stepped closer. That I can do it but shouldn't be rewarded for it? That my ability is real but inconvenient to your worldview? You can't have it both ways. Either I'm useful or I'm not. Either I earn my position through demonstrable value, or positions are just prizes for the right bloodlines. This is manipulation. This is proof, Lyran corrected. You want to challenge my legitimacy? Fine. Challenge it with action, not words. Show the court you can do better. Or admit that rank isn't the only measure of worth. And sometimes the girl nobody believed in turns out to be exactly what the kingdom needs. For a long moment, Ashton just stared at her. Then she turned to Draven, clearly expecting him to refuse the challenge. I won't force anyone to endure the curse, Draven said, his voice tight. Lady Ashton, you're not obligated to accept this. If I refuse, it looks like cowardice, Ashton said bitterly. If you accept, it'll destroy you, Draven shot back. The curse at full strength, even for an hour, you'll never be the same. Then I guess we'll find out how much my convictions matter. Ashton's smile was sharp. I accept 1 hour. If I survive with my sanity intact, Miss Vale withdraws her position and admits her claims are exaggerated. And if you can't? Lyran asked. Then I'll withdraw my challenge to your legitimacy, but not my opposition. You'll still be wrong, Miss Vale, just powerful enough that I can't prove it. It wasn't the victory Lyran wanted, but it was the one she'd get. She looked at Draven, saw the fear and fury warring in his expression. I don't like this, he said quietly, for her ears only. I know, but it's the only way to end this debate permanently. She touched his hand. 1 hour. Then everyone will understand. The ordeal took place that evening in the throne room, with the full court as witnesses. Draven stood in the center, Lyran beside him, their hands clasped. Lady Ashton waited 10 feet away, her face composed but her hands trembling. The rules are simple, Lord Theron announced. Miss Vale will release the king's hand, allowing the curse to flow unchecked. Lady Ashton will then approach and remain within 10 feet of His Majesty for 1 hour. If she maintains consciousness and coherence for that duration, she wins. If not, Miss Vale's position is confirmed as legitimate. And Miss Vale, someone called, she'll be right beside him the whole time. Because that's what I do, Lyran said simply. Every day. All day. This is my job. She looked at Draven one last time, squeezed his hand, and let go. The curse hit like a tidal wave. She'd grown so accustomed to dampening it that feeling it at full strength again was physically staggering. Pain lanced through her chest, her head, every nerve ending suddenly on fire. Around the room, wolves gasped and fell back, the weakest dropping to their knees. Draven's eyes had already gone silver, his body rigid with the effort of containing power that wanted desperately to break free. Whenever you're ready, Lady Ashton, Theron said. Ashton took a step forward, then another. By the third step, she was visibly sweating. By the fifth, she'd stopped, her face contorted. Keep going, someone shouted. You said you could do it. Ashton took another step, and another. She made it to 8 feet away before she fell to her knees with a scream that echoed off the stone walls. I can't, she gasped. It's too much. Make it stop. It's been 90 seconds, Lyran said, her own voice strained from sharing the curse's pressure. 58 and a half minutes to go. Please. Ashton was crying now, hands pressed to her temples. Please, I yield. I can't. Miss Vale endures this every moment of every day, Draven managed through gritted teeth. And you want to tell her she's not qualified? Ashton collapsed completely, unconscious before she hit the floor. Healers rushed forward, but Lyran was already moving, taking Draven's hand again. The curse retreated immediately, and the collective sigh of relief from the court was audible. 1 minute, 37 seconds, Theron announced. Lady Ashton has failed the ordeal. No one argued. Several wolves were helping Ashton to a chair, her face slack, eyes unfocused. She'd survived, but the experience had broken something in her. The absolute certainty that she was right, maybe. Or just the illusion that suffering could be measured by rank. This trial is concluded, Draven said, his voice carrying despite his exhaustion. Lady Ashton and the other accused will face sentencing for their crimes. Miss Vale's position is confirmed as legitimate by trial ordeal, and any future challenges to her authority will be considered challenges to the crown itself. He looked out over the assembled court. And let this be the last time we have this conversation. Rank is not the only measure of value. Power comes in forms we don't always recognize, and sometimes the person you least expect turns out to be exactly what you need. Anyone who can't accept that is welcome to leave my kingdom. No one left. But Lyran saw acceptance settling into faces that had held nothing but contempt a week ago. Not friendship, not even liking, but respect earned through the hardest currency there was, demonstrated value under pressure. The sentencing came 2 days later. Lady Ashton was stripped of her title and territory, exiled from court for life. The others received varying punishments based on their level of involvement, some imprisoned, some fined, a few executed for their direct role in the assassination attempts. It should have felt like victory. Instead, Lyran felt hollow. You're thinking too much, Draven said that evening. They were in his private gardens, away from the court's watching eyes, and for the first time in weeks, Lyran let herself breathe. I prove my worth by making Ashton suffer, she said. That's not exactly noble. You proved your worth by showing what you endured daily. That Ashton couldn't handle it isn't your fault. He pulled her closer. You gave her a choice. She could have refused the challenge. Could she? With her pride on the line, with everyone watching? Lyran shook her head. I trapped her, just like Helena trapped me, for years. No. Draven's voice was firm. Helena trapped you in weakness and isolation. You challenged Ashton to prove her strength. Those aren't the same thing. Maybe not, but the line felt thinner than Lyran wanted to admit. What happens now? She asked. Yes. The conspiracy is broken. The court accepts me, barely. But what's the actual plan? I'm royal advisor on curse management. What does that even mean long term? Draven was quiet for a long moment. Then, marry me. Lyran's brain stopped working. What? Marry me. He turned to face her fully. Not because of the curse, not because of politics, but because in 2 weeks, you've become the most important person in my life, and I want that to be official. Draven, we barely know each other. I know you stayed when everyone else ran. I know you faced down my monster and didn't flinch. I know you share my pain every day without complaint. His hands cupped her face. I know Alara was my true mate, and I'll never have that again, but I also know I don't need perfect love to build a life with someone. I just need partnership, trust, someone brave enough to stand beside me even when it's hard. And you're all of that. Lyran's chest ached. That's not love. No, but it could become love given time, if you're willing to try. His eyes searched hers. I'm not offering you a fairy tale, Lyran. I'm offering you a partnership with a cursed king who needs you more than he should and trusts you more than he's trusted anyone in 10 years. That might not be romantic, but it's real. It was possibly the least romantic proposal in history, and somehow that made it perfect. The court will have opinions, Lyran said. The court always has opinions. Let them. Helena will be furious. Helena is already exiled from court after we finished investigating her theft of your inheritance. She can be furious from a distance. Lyran laughed despite herself. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple. It's complicated and messy, and probably a political disaster waiting to happen. Draven's smile was crooked.
but we've survived worse in the last 2 weeks. I think we can handle this. She should say no.
Should recognize this for what it was, a practical arrangement born of necessity and proximity. But standing in the garden with the king's hands gentle on her face and the curse a manageable hum between them, Lyran realized she didn't want to say no. Maybe love would come later. Maybe it wouldn't. But partnership, trust, standing together against a world that wanted to break them, that was already there. Okay, she whispered. His smile could have lit the kingdom. The wedding was small by royal standards, just the pack alphas and essential court members, held in the palace chapel with Theron officiating. Lyran wore silver blue that matched Draven's eyes, and he wore black with the royal wolf insignia, and when they clasped hands, the curse settled into something almost peaceful. "Do you take this woman as your queen and mate before the kingdom?" Theron asked. "I do." "Do you take this man as your king and mate before the kingdom?" Lyran looked at Draven, really looked at him, saw the scars he carried, the pain he endured, the strength he'd built from survival. Saw someone who'd chosen her not despite her flaws, but because her particular brokenness fit his in all the right ways. "I do." The court rose, and if some of the applause was grudging, at least it was there. Alpha Tauren bowed deeply. Lord Garrett nodded with something like respect. Even the nobles who'd testified against the Purist Coalition managed polite smiles. They'd done it. The Omega and the Cursed King had somehow forged a legitimate partnership from nothing but necessity and stubborn refusal to surrender. The celebration afterward was more elaborate, a feast that lasted into the night, with wolves from every pack raising glasses to the new queen. Lyran sat beside Draven at the high table, her hand in his, feeling the weight of the crown that had been placed on her head during the ceremony. She was queen now, not just advisor, not just the girl who could manage the curse, queen of a kingdom that had spent weeks trying to destroy her. "Overwhelmed?" Draven murmured. "Completely." She squeezed his hand. "But in a good way. Maybe." "It gets easier," he lied, and they both knew it, but she appreciated the effort. Mira appeared at her elbow, dabbing at tears. "Miss Vale, Your Majesty, I'm so proud." "Thank you for everything," Lyran said. "For the clothes, the advice, for not giving up on me when everyone else wanted me gone." "You gave us a reason to hope," Mira said simply. "That's worth more than you know." As the feast wound down, Draven stood, silencing the room with a gesture. "I want to make an announcement," he said. "Effective immediately, I'm dissolving the High Council's authority over rank-based restrictions. Going forward, any wolf, regardless of their birth rank, will have the opportunity to rise based on merit and demonstrated ability." The room erupted. Some cheered. Others shouted protests. Draven let it build, then cut through it with power that pressed every wolf back into their seats. "This isn't negotiable. For 300 years, we've let tradition dictate potential. We've wasted countless wolves who had value simply because they were born to the wrong rank. That ends now. The kingdom needs strength, intelligence, courage, all the qualities that have nothing to do with whether you're an alpha or an omega." He looked at Lyran. "My queen proved that. Now we're going to build a system that recognizes it." "Your Majesty," Lord Garrett stood carefully. "With respect, this will cause chaos. Pack hierarchies are based on rank. If you remove those restrictions, then packs will adapt. Or they won't, and they'll fail, and stronger systems will replace them." Draven's voice was steel. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you how things are going to be. Anyone who can't accept it should find a kingdom more to their liking." No one moved. But Lyran saw calculation in their eyes, wolves trying to figure out how this new order would affect their power, their plans, their futures. Change always looked like chaos from the inside. That didn't make it wrong. Over the following months, the kingdom transformed. Slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. An Omega in the Southern Territories proved to have a gift for agricultural management and was appointed to oversee crop distribution. A Beta with unusual diplomatic skills became ambassador to a neighboring kingdom. Positions that had been locked to certain ranks for generations opened up, and wolves who'd spent their lives invisible suddenly had the chance to be seen. It wasn't smooth. There were protests, small rebellions, nobles who refused to accept the new order and lost their territories for it. But gradually, inevitably, the kingdom bent toward merit over birthright. And at the center of it all stood Lyran, the Omega Queen who'd started a revolution by refusing to disappear.
She and Draven fell into a rhythm. Mornings reviewing policy and disputes, afternoons managing the curse and court politics, evenings alone when they could finally be just two people instead of king and queen. They learned each other slowly, his dry humor, her unexpected stubbornness, the ways they fit together that had nothing to do with the curse. Love came gradually, built from shared laughter and mutual respect, and the simple fact that they chose each other every day. Not the explosive, fated mate bond Draven had shared with Alara. Something quieter, steadier, strong enough to build a life on. On a spring morning, 6 months after the wedding, Lyran stood on the palace balcony watching the kingdom wake. Behind her, she heard Draven enter, felt his arms wrap around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That a year ago, I was invisible, and now I'm queen of the wolves who dismissed me." She leaned back against him. "It doesn't feel real sometimes. Does it feel right?" She considered that. The weight of responsibility, the constant pressure, the knowledge that half the kingdom still thought she didn't belong, all of it was exhausting. But underneath the exhaustion was something else. Purpose. Value. The knowledge that she mattered. "Yes," she said finally. "It feels right." The curse hummed between them, always there, always managed. They'd learned that it would never truly go away. Some burdens couldn't be fixed, only carried. But carried together, even the impossible became bearable. In the courtyard below, a young Omega approached the palace gates, her posture uncertain, her eyes hopeful. A guard spoke to her, and instead of turning her away, he gestured toward the administrative building where the new merit-based positions were posted. Lyran watched the girl's face transform from resignation to possibility and felt something shift in her chest. This was why it mattered. Not for her own glory or revenge or proving Helena wrong, though all of that was satisfying, but for the countless wolves like her, born to ranks that told them they were less, who'd now have the chance to prove otherwise. "I was thinking," Draven said, his voice quiet against her ear, "about children. Whether we want them. Whether it's fair to pass the curse to another generation." Lyran had wondered about that too. The curse would continue unless the bloodline ended. But ending a bloodline meant giving up on the future, and they'd fought too hard for the future to abandon it now. "If we have a child," she said slowly, "and they inherit the curse, at least they'll know they're not alone with it. That there are people who'll stay instead of running. That burden doesn't have to mean isolation." "You'd be willing to risk that?" "I'm willing to build something better than what we had. If that means facing hard truths and harder choices, then we face them together." She turned in his arms. "That's what partnership means, right? Not avoiding the difficult things, but deciding they're worth it anyway." Draven kissed her, slow and thorough, and the curse settled into contentment between them. They stood there for a long time, watching the kingdom transform beneath them. Wolves of all ranks moving through streets that were slowly learning to value them differently. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was progress. And sometimes progress was the only victory that mattered. Years later, when scholars wrote about the reign of King Draven and Queen Lyran, they would focus on the policy changes, the dissolution of rank restrictions, the slow transformation from hierarchy to meritocracy. They would debate the wisdom of their choices, analyze the rebellions they sparked and suppressed, calculate the cost in political capital and noble opposition. But they would miss the heart of it, the simple truth that started everything. A girl who'd been taught she was nothing decided she was worth something. A king who'd suffered alone found someone brave enough to share the burden. And together, they proved that strength came in forms tradition had never learned to recognize. The Omega who broke the curse became the queen who changed everything. Not through power or birthright or any of the qualities the kingdom had valued for centuries. Through the simple, stubborn courage of refusing to disappear. And in the end, that made all the difference.